Russia started this war with the largest tank reserve on the planet. Over 12,000 armored vehicles. Stockpiles so deep that Western analysts said, quote, "Russia can absorb losses indefinitely." They were wrong. In less than 3 years, Russia has lost more tanks than the entire United States Army owns. And the storage yards that were supposed to make that impossible, they're running thin. This is the story of how the most armor-heavy military in modern history is being dismantled, not by a superpower, not by NATO, but by a smaller neighbor with $400 drones and a will to survive. To understand why these losses are so catastrophic, you have to understand the bet the Soviet Union made after World War II. The Soviets watched Germany nearly destroy them in 1941. Fast armor, coordinated columns, deep strikes into undefended rear areas, and made a decision. The next great war would be won by whoever could field the most tanks, the fastest, with reserves so deep they could never be emptied. So they built, for 5 decades straight. At its Cold War peak, the Soviet Union possessed over 50,000 tanks, more than every NATO country combined. The strategy was simple. If war came to Europe, Soviet armored columns would push west so fast and in such numbers that NATO couldn't organize a response before it was already over. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia inherited that doctrine and those stockpiles. Thousands of tanks sat in storage yards across Russia's interior, not combat-ready but retrievable. T-72s, T-80s, T-62s, lined up in rows that stretched further than you could see. For 30 years, Russian generals looked at satellite images of those yards and felt something close to invincibility. Then they drove into Ukraine and started spending that inheritance faster than anyone thought possible. Here is the number Russian planners are not discussing publicly. Russia's tank manufacturing capacity, even at wartime surge levels, produces somewhere between 200 and 400 new or fully rebuilt tanks per year, against losses that, during intense fighting, have run at several times that rate. New production is not a solution. It is a rounding error. By conservative independent assessments, Russia has lost over 3,000 tanks since February 2022. Add armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and self-propelled artillery, the total climbs past 15,000 platforms. To put that number in human terms, Germany, America's most capable armored ally in Europe, fields approximately 300 operational tanks. Russia has lost 10 times Germany's entire tank inventory in under 3 years of fighting, and here is what makes it indeed worse. Those Soviet-era storage reserves were never designed to last this long. They were built to bridge the gap between the opening days of a war and full industrial mobilization, a conflict measured in weeks, not years. No Soviet planner in 1975 engineered a reserve system to absorb continuous losses across a 900-mile front for 36 months straight. Russia is fighting a war its own doctrine never anticipated surviving. There is a term military logisticians use that almost never makes it into public reporting: cannibalization rate. It means stripping functional parts from multiple damaged vehicles to keep one vehicle running. When a military's cannibalization rate climbs, it is one of the clearest early warning signs of systemic collapse. They are seen consuming itself just to stay in the field. Satellite imagery tells the story that official Russian statements cannot. Analysts tracking Russian storage facilities over time have documented lots that once held dense, organized rows of armored vehicles now showing significant gaps. More revealing are the vehicles that remain. Many appear to be hulks already, stripped of usable components, engines pulled, optics removed, track systems cannibalized for parts. A tank on a storage lot that has been stripped is not a reserve asset. It is a donor carcass, and this is why you are now seeing T-55s near the front lines. A tank designed in 1947, a vehicle that was already considered obsolete during the First Gulf War in 1991, when American tanks destroyed Iraqi T-72s at ranges the T-55 couldn't even engage. Nobody sent the T-55 forward because it performs well in modern combat. It was sent forward because the better options have already been consumed. That single image, a 1947 tank in a 2024 war, is not a detail, it is a diagnosis. Now layer on top of this supply crisis the one thing Russia's military planners genuinely did not model before the invasion: the industrialization of drone warfare. Ukraine has constructed what is effectively a distributed sensor network across the entire battlefield. Commercial quadcopters, purpose-built FPV attack drones that cost $400 and can kill a $2 million armored vehicle. Longer-range reconnaissance platforms that can shadow a convoy for miles before it ever reaches Ukrainian defensive lines. The result is a fundamental inversion of how armored warfare has functioned for 80 years. Historically, armor derived its combat power from two things working simultaneously: shock and opacity. A tank column that appears suddenly and moves fast is terrifying, precisely because defenders can't see it coming, can't track its direction, and can't organize a response before contact is already made. Speed and surprise were the tank's greatest force multipliers. Drones elucidate both. When a reconnaissance UAV is tracking your column from 400 feet overhead, there is no surprise. When every route you can physically use, because 60-ton machines cannot navigate soft ground, has been pre-mapped and pre-ranged by Ukrainian artillery, there is no shock. When FPV drones are positioned at every terrain choke point, every road bend, every damaged bridge where your vehicle must slow to a crawl, the convoy is not a striking force. It is a moving target list. The first vehicle hit doesn't just lose one tank. It stops the entire column. The road closes, the vehicles behind bunch together, and a bunched armored formation sitting still is not a military asset. It is an artillery target with coordinates already dialed in. Ukraine doesn't even need to destroy everything. Destroy the lead vehicle at the right place, at the right moment, and the rest of the column destroys itself through panic, blocked routes, and poor visibility. The FPV drone doesn't win the battle. It starts a chain reaction that wins it. When tanks become too scarce to risk in frontal assault roles, commanders face a brutal substitution problem. Russia's answer has been motorcycles, ATVs, and civilian pickup trucks. These so-called moped assaults have been documented across multiple sectors of the front. The tactical logic is thin but real. Light infantry moving fast can sometimes slip through drone observation windows, reach Ukrainian trench lines before FPV operators can react, and create local breaches that heavier follow-on forces can exploit. The human cost is staggering. Infantry without armor on a drone-saturated battlefield is not an adapted tactic. It is an attrition method, a way of finding Ukrainian defensive positions by running soldiers into them until something breaks. Russian casualty estimates from Western intelligence assessments have consistently indicated loss that dwarf anything sustained by a major military power in conventional combat since the Korean War. A motorcycle can move fast. It cannot protect a soldier from shrapnel. An ATV can cross a field. It offers no defense when a UAV is watching from above. A civilian van can carry troops to the line. Once artillery lands nearby, it becomes a coffin. The shift from tanks to motorcycles is not an adaptation Russia chose. It is a confession, a field acknowledgement that the armored doctrine which defined Russian military power for 8 decades is no longer reliably executable under current battlefield conditions. Here is what most American coverage of this war is missing entirely. Russia's conventional military power was the primary justification for every major NATO decision over the past 30 years. The eastern expansion, the deployment of U.S. forces to Poland and the Baltics, the pre-positioning of American armor in Romania. The underlying threat was always the same. Russia could mass enough armored force to overwhelm the Baltic states before NATO could respond. Analysts called it the Suwalki Gap problem. It kept defense planners awake. That threat is diminishing, vehicle by vehicle, convoy by convoy. An army consuming its Soviet-era reserves at this rate is an army with measurably less capacity to execute a rapid armored strike into NATO territory than it had in January 2022. The mechanized shock force that, for decades of NATO planning was built around is, right now, being transferred to Ukrainian scrapyards and trophy collections. This does not make Russia less dangerous. A nuclear-armed state with a humiliated military and a leadership with nothing left to lose is dangerous in ways that are harder to quantify than tank counts. But the specific threat, the armored blitzkrieg, the thundering columns across the North European plain, is receding as a near-term military reality. For American taxpayers asking what $100 billion in Ukraine aid actually bought, here is a direct answer. It degraded a peer adversary's conventional military capacity to a degree that would have required a direct NATO-Russia war to achieve otherwise, without the loss of a single American soldier in direct combat. Whatever one thinks of the policy, the strategic arithmetic is difficult to argue with. The honest answer is, not quickly and not to its pre-war standard. Rebuilding tank reserves requires specialized manufacturing infrastructure that was largely inherited from Soviet-era factories with minimal modernization investments since 1991. Key components, advanced optics, modern fire control systems, reactive armor packages, depend on foreign technology now blocked by sanctions. Russia has found partial workarounds through third-country procurement, but the quality gap is measurable and growing. More fundamentally, rebuilding a reserve takes generations, not years. The stockpile Russia is burning through now was accumulated across 50 years of Soviet industrial output running at Cold War scale. Even a fully committed wartime economy cannot replace that in a presidential term. What Russia may be able to do is stabilize, slow its loss rate by using smaller assault groups, conserving its remaining modern platforms, pushing older vehicles forward as expendable, and investing more aggressively in its own drone capabilities to erode Ukraine's surveillance advantage. What Russia cannot do is pretend the reserve is what it was. The satellite images exist. The analysts have counted. The gaps in the storage yards are visible to anyone willing to look. There is a harder question sitting underneath all of this, one that no military on Earth has fully answered yet. We are watching in real time the most data-rich stress test of armored doctrine in the history of warfare, and what the data is returning is uncomfortable for every army that has organized itself around the tank as its primary offensive instrument. If a $400 drone can reliably kill a $2 million tank, and the evidence increasingly says it can, then the entire cost-benefit architecture of armored warfare needs to be rebuilt from scratch. The United States Army fields over 2,500 Abrams tanks. China has positioned thousands of armored vehicles across contingencies in the Pacific. Every major military power in the world is watching Ukraine and running the internal calculation. What does our armor look like in a drone-saturated environment? Russia is not just losing a war. It is providing every military strategist on Earth with the most brutally assessed operational data any of them will ever receive without being in the fight themselves. The lessons being written in smoke on those Ukrainian roads will reshape military doctrine, American, Chinese, European, for the next 50 years. Somewhere out there, a T-55 that entered Soviet service before most of your grandparents were born is burning on a Ukrainian road, and the doctrine that put it there, the 50-year bet on mass armor as the ultimate expression of military power, is burning with it. The question now isn't whether Russia can replace what it's lost. The question is whether any military, anywhere, has truly reckoned with what this war is proving about the tank's future on the modern battlefield, including ours. Is this the end of the tank era, or just a temporary disruption that better doctrine and technology will eventually absorb? Drop your analysis below, and if this kind of deep, clear military analysis is why you're here, subscribe. We go deeper every week.